Welcome to the EDIJester podcast, and thank you very much for taking the time to listen. Today we're going to talk about the acid rain of ideologues. What exactly do we mean by that? We live in a world now where the intense focus on the concept of a self-declared and constructed identity, and specifically gender identity, is a deeply cancerous form of be and fuck anything, which only has one ending. It is the perfect example of how ideology, in this case gender identity ideology and queer theory, can hew the most capable of us with its axe of idiocy, decapitating us from our faculties and our rationality. But what it does the best of all is a call to limitation and tunneled vision. And that limitation, although primarily intellectually and psychologically seen, is also bound up in the conceptual idea of a specific linguistically constructed space. By that I mean they create the space. They'll say, oh, this is a space. This is a safe space. They say the words, they make the space real. Who are they? People will ask me. Well, universities, bureaucrats, HR departments, you name it. They make the space and the space is real. You hear people say this quite a lot now. Of course, I am active in this space. This is a well-being space. I mean, literally a well-being space. And work in this space is ongoing, as if that means anything to anyone, which of course it doesn't if examined too closely. It is a cunning linguistic and ontological lever, and by that I mean it affects words and knowledge. A wedge in what things mean, how we discuss them, and how these discussions are carried out. In essence, the space that they create is a leveler. It's designed to create a space in which everyone can take part, and there is no such thing as an expert. It is in effect creating the opposite of what it suggests. Space, infinite and unburdened by borders, becomes something that is defined by the speaker, in the art space, for example. And although this implies the ability to explore that defined space, often by whim rather than reason, which is great, there is also a yang to this yin, because this subtle use has consequences, and one is that it detaches endeavours from the idea of a discipline. Discipline grounded by previous thinking, collaboration, process and achievement. The scientific discipline would be an example, and often a discipline that has been and will continue to be tested to destruction and built upon as one would construct a nuclear plant. Artists gain from the ability to let the juices flow. The mind takes flights of fancy. Unfettered and glorious inspiration occurs, and in doing so, they may create something awe-inspiring and new. But this is the opposite of structure that is required for the kind of inspiration that building that nuclear power plant will involve. Opposite, not better. And that is an important distinction, because both are deeply human activities and part of our progress, civilizing both of us and the world. Ideology and the purveyors of space is a different beast altogether. It is not free-floating, and it does not create hierarchies of competence. It creates intersections of acceptable identity, thoughts and actions, and it does so through behaviourist control, inquisition, social opprobrium and censor. It is profoundly authoritarian and profoundly controlling. They will say, we are working in the science space, or we are working in the academic space, which allows them to interfere in disciplines they have no expertise or interest in advancing. The theory that they are doing this for funding is also not one that can be easily dismissed, for after all, the bulk of the humanities are just about finished as a university product, as everyone catches on that you can do a degree with the right 25 books, 20 YouTube videos and a decent mentor, and it will probably cost you a lot less than 30 odd grand. But the insert real discipline here space, the science space or the physics space, the engineering space, is uttered to carry out a kind of forced teaming between the arse end of academia, critical social studies and critical social justice, and the crown of academia, which is the STEM, or the brain of academia, STEM, right? Our absolute crown jewel in Britain's future, and one which we will see great investment in over the next few years. They do this in order to make sure that the arse end of academia can tell the brain what it can do. They want to inculcate the central beliefs of this new religion lest heretics be not rooted out and exposed. Because in this space, rather than the discipline, you, even though you may be the greatest engineer this world has ever created, can still be cancelled at a whim by those in the space who think alike and act alike. They are the academic Borg. When that happens, the new Inquisition begins, and surveillance and control are gained through the hijacking of funding, silencing of dissent, and centering of power with the new priests of HR, human resources, and diversity, inclusivity, and equity. In essence, when those free-floating and undefinable sets of ideas are gathered under the grievance template of power and oppression on a societal level, they create faux disciplines as a cover for equity-driven activism. These are there to see: raw, critical social justice, critical race theory, critical fat studies, critical white studies, critical black studies. I mean, for goodness sake, we'll have critical mice studies soon, and perhaps critical scooters that children might use on a Wednesday studies. This is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. What then happens is the individual is urged, as part of these studies, used as a template on everything else, to take up the cudgel because something must be done. Like a purple-rinsed ant twitching her curtains in suburbia. From such simple ideas, moral panics begin, and equity is the utopian dream that drives them forward, that we must all have equality of outcome. Sameness is desired, not individual achievement, not excellence, not merit, and certainly not hierarchy, for mediocrity is the end game. For meritocracy, hierarchy, and competence are anathema to the cultists of queer theory and gender ideology, in which the destruction of anything like reasoned and organised normality is their purpose for existing. They wish to tear things down. The only structure that is allowed is one of grievance and contrarianism, the dullard notion that everything must be seen as about power and oppression, and as they lay that filthy template created in their faux disciplines across everything, they do so in the guise of kindness, fairness, and inclusivity. One may smile and smile, but still be a villain. The derangement these ideologues embrace is in its error from its very roots, wrongly interpreting the reality of our world as about infinite power struggles, ideologically proliferated from all sides, that requires the application of an enforced mindset of utopian sameness. This is because they cannot understand competence, for they have never been required to show it. They are just busily self-flagellating and practicing intellectual oral sex on one another in the closed-off and ideological spaces they have created and recreated for themselves in desperation for real recognition, which, if the education system has got any sense whatsoever in this country, we will ensure will never come. It will never come, for they create nothing, they are nothing, and they represent nothing. They apply a template which only allows for the formation of a never-ending spiral of dissent, disruption, and restructuring, at which point you start the whole process again. No status quo can be allowed to exist for fear of inequity or a lack of sameness. Or in simpler terms, their club is exclusive, and they want to force you to join it by whatever means that requires. And when you don't, that's when they'll come for you. It is this idea of a space, rather than a discipline, that allows ideological and fake disciplines to evolve, primarily in academia and then eventually across society, and the danger then becomes that every Tom, Dick and Harry are allowed their own truth, and a plethora of uninformed opinions which of course disrupt the discipline, which their parasitic ideas have infected, and then they are on the way to achieving their goal. A truth that is enforced through inquisition, intellectual slavery, systemic parasitism, and surveillance in the new panopticon, from which the guardians of the ideological rule gaze Sauron-like over the landscape, alert for infraction and heresy. Here we see the tool of cancel culture. The notion of gender has been around for a long time, linguistically and in other ways. Gender identity has been around for a fair time, but first in an idea really baptised by Richard Stoller before undertaking a confirmation in the exorable experimentations of John Money. The infection of gender ideology is now visible all around us. From sports to pronouns and emails, the symptoms are everywhere. which leads perhaps to the question of why the individual is so susceptible to this ideological derangement and why so many of them are young. I'm not blaming them, believe me. It is the older folk who hold responsibility for the disgusting betrayal and ruination of the future, and that includes you and I. For we may well leave the world in a worse place than when we entered it, and that is a collective failure to be ashamed of. The problem with the neoliberal idea, coupled with the power and oppression narratives and religiosity-drenched nature of ideological cult-like structures, is that they are a vice of misery. The cultist teachers and their ideological lapdogs of the social sciences, HR and elsewhere have led young people to believe that they are special, unique and complete. That your opinion matters on everything. And just be kind and respect the lie that the world is that simple and not unbelievably harsh, which it is. That they construct for themselves an identity that everyone must accept, as if identity isn't created by outside forces, even if the idea of identity exists at all, which gender identity doesn't, only in the minds of the feverishly captured. They've also been told that feelings are more important than facts, and that anyone who attacks that is the enemy. They are constantly under fire from an unknown and undefined oppressor. That's what they're being told. Consequences of your actions are oppression. So whatever they do, and no matter how bad it is, if you strike back, you are the oppressor. And the only safe spaces are those assigned. This they have done to create a terrifying world. They've also done it in technologically created social environments where you can create an illusory identity of who you are and pretend the delusion is real. Where people become cataloguers and curators of their own lives rather than living it, and in doing so they only carry out high altitude, low resolution thinking. When you die in this space, the death is social, public and unstoppable. The shaming of the inquisitions of old in kilobyte chunks. For in this world, conformism is everything. What did we think would happen when we told young people that a monster was always trying to get them? That they could be what they wanted to be and do so with no consequences or recourse to a personality or character that is developed with others, rather than displayed to them through filters and Photoshop. The problem is that as adulthood approaches, the young folk will scream and complain to perceived parental figures as their intellect and common sense reasserts itself and they begin wrestling with the childish lies they have been taught. Immediately they scurry away from it as fast as they can, and they cower from the greatest space of all, reality. Part of this process of realization for them is denial. For what they are experiencing is grief, which all good learning must be. They will grieve for a lost idea. Unfortunately, in this case, they will experience grief for an entire way of thinking, and that is going to hurt. For in that harsh reality, they have no space at all. For ideology knows no independent thought. They don't know how to think independently. They don't know how to think non-ideologically. Like a mouse, they will shrink in the corner, unable to embrace the harsh world around them, seeing no way out of that sense of undefinable fear we have inculcated in them. They journey inward, personality becomes gender and narcissism. Reality becomes the enemy, and eventually, when they need to make their self-made avatar of kindness, goodness and virtue a reality, something none of us can live up to, the sweaty, rank hand of ideology is offered and grasped. What follows is a descent into unreality, and in the worst cases, bodily mutilation, sterilization, and illness. Family damage, separation from others who see reality, the withdrawal into an ideological captured world of the inner self. I suspect they do not follow this because they deeply believe it. They follow it because they are frightened, and in that fear they construct a persona of oppressed identity, an avatar to escape perceived abuse. An abuse that does not exist, but we have convinced them does. They are fighting a fake foe. They are trying to escape reality because they see the neoliberal lie they have been sold, and the ramifications of having to admit it as a lie are too terrifying to consider. They have become the indoctrinated drones of ideological fiat. That is the abuse itself, the process of propagandizing that whittles the individual capability to nothing, coddles the strength from them, and then tells them that only the company of the converted can save them. It is a cult. We should be wary of them, for they are scared, and when people are frightened, they do truly dreadful things. And it may be, I fear, that this is just the beginning.